Police make an arrest after a shooting this afternoon outside a Chesterfield office building near the courthouse.
A fiery tractor-trailer crash kills 2 people and closes a Virginia highway for hours.
And look at these pictures. High water closes part of Interstate 95 today in downtown Richmond.
And it's a story you'll see just on 6. We're getting a better idea of where the Redskins may practice when they arrive in Richmond.
We begin tonight with that shooting at a Chesterfield office building. One person is now in custody after shots were fired at the Center Court building. That's an office building near the county courthouse on Courthouse Road, and it's home to the law offices of Barnes and Deal. We're told the intended target in the early afternoon incident was a lawyer who was representing a person involved in a custody battle. That lawyer was able to dodge the bullet.
CBS 6's John Burkett arrived on scene minutes after the shooting. And John, a couple of questions for you here. What have you found out about what led up to the shooting, and how did police capture the suspects?
Sam, well, witnesses say seconds felt like forever as a gunman toting a rifle-style weapon, according to Chesterfield police, takes aim at a lawyer in the parking lot of the law office building behind me, and 2 officers are credited for preventing further violence. Police with rifles and canine sniffing, troopers and Chesterfield investigators swarmed this office complex right across the street from the Chesterfield County Courthouse.
Reference to an active shooter call. Upon arrival, we were able to find one subject that we took into custody.
Police arrest the triggerman on scene and say a domestic issue from a court case this morning triggered the violence.
This is actually headed south. You see all of the vivid lightning there. This is a live shot headed south on 95 toward the, let's see, 95, and it's probably downtown expressway. I don't know exactly what toll booth they're coming up to there, but this is going to be heading down toward the Chester area where that severe thunderstorm warning is in effect, and you can see just very, very heavy rainfall, lots of lightning as our vehicles are out now en route. We've got some going toward current storms, others going toward the damage to our north, and we're going to be checking that out and see exactly what happened up there. Have had some confirmed reports of tornadoes with these storms that have moved through the area this evening. So again, there's your live shot of what's happening outside right now. And on radar, you can see exactly what they are driving through. Again, tremendous amounts of heavy rainfall here right over Richmond, but it gets really heavy once you go south.
In the aftermath of any severe storm, the warnings are constant. Report all down power lines and stay away from them. But one local man says his dog was electrocuted by wires in his backyard. A death he says never should have happened. Lorenzo Hall is live now with the story. So.
You know, Bill, while those downed power lines have caused temporary detours and power outages for folks here in central Virginia, one Henrico man says those downed power lines caused a permanent loss. His dog.
I let my dog down.
For that reason, this Henrico man says he'll never forget these summer storms. Kenneth Newland's dog of 12 years was electrocuted and killed by a downed power line following the initial round of severe storms last Monday.
It wasn't a typical dog bark. It was like a stress bark. I whipped my head around and I saw her in the air.
The burn marks are still present. Newland says he was assessing the damage from the storm with a neighbor when his dog Emily ran to the back of the yard where an energized power line was laying. Newland could only watch because he too would have been electrocuted.
I watched sparks come off her paws, and then I had to sit there and smell her smolder for 40 minutes.
We begin CBS 6 News at 11 with breaking news out of Richmond. I'm Bill Fitzgerald.
I'm Stephanie Rochon. An intense standoff is taking place right now in the city's museum district, forcing police to close down several streets. John Burkett is live with the developments. John.
Now, Bill and Steph, it's pretty hard to see me because the SWAT team has asked us to turn our light off so it doesn't distract them outside while they're doing their work. Right now, a guy is on an intercom system asking a Calvin Green to come outside apartment 3206 and turn himself in. That's what they're asking right now. Let me get up here and show you what's going on here. This over here is the apartment that they're focusing in on.
A resident going out for a night on the town is confronted by police, told to put his hands up, but he is not the person they're looking for.
There's another one. He went back in.
This man that scurries back into a Hanover Avenue apartment is who police want to talk to. Around 7:30 Friday night, there's a domestic disturbance call at this apartment. Police say a female leaves. Then a little bit later, sources say she receives a picture of her significant other with a gun to his head.
And we want to get back to that breaking news that we had for you at the top of the show. An emergency landing scheduled for a small plane at the Chesterfield County Airport. Our Greg McQuaid is there on the scene and joins us now by phone with an update. Greg?
Well, Cheryl, the tensions are running very high right now. You see this plane landing. It's a twin-engine Baron. Apparently, they've had some terrible landing gear problems. What they're doing right now, it looks like the landing gear is down. They are doing a flyby. You're looking live right now. That's the first visual confirmation that we've had of this plane in the last hour. We heard the plane had some issues at about 11:05. You see at the end of the runway, the Chesterfield EMS and fire, they are here at the airport. What we understand, about an hour ago, the pilot on board this twin-engine Baron plane reported that his landing gear was stuck. So they contacted a mechanic here at the airport, and over the last hour, they have been manually trying to crank the landing gear down with their bare hands on board this plane.
The welfare of every citizen in the city of Richmond rests in the hands of 9 elected council members. At Richmond City Hall, they work and they vote. But where a city council member lives is also tied to the job. Under state law, they must reside in the district they represent.
Who lives in this house right here?
Have no clue.
We started looking for clues about City Councilman Doug Connor's permanent home after he proposed redistricting changes that would move this townhouse he owns near Jank Road from a neighboring district into his. The tenant next door says the home has been empty for months.
It's been a mystery to us. We kind of like it, though. We get to play our music and not have anybody complain.
So we kept looking. And Richmond property records then led us here to a home Connor owns inside his district on Germain Road in South Richmond. We came back about a half a dozen times, morning, evening, and night, but never found the councilman.
I've never seen a car there. I never.
Germain Road neighbor Willie Shepard says she walks for exercise on her street every day and sees the home the same way.
Empty, like it is, with the shutters down.
At least 10 other neighbors told us the same, many saying the house had been vacant for up to 2 years.
We visited every Richmond property listed to the councilman several times, but we could never find him. So we checked the Chesterfield County property listings, and we found this address, listed to Doug Connor.
We went to the Chesterfield home early Monday morning and found the councilman stopping to get the paper in his driveway. We followed him about 30 minutes to Richmond, where he made a stop at his Germain Road property to pick up the mail before heading to work. We looked further into his Chesterfield County residence and found 2 campaign donations to state delegates made from Connor in December of 2011, both listing his name and the Chesterfield address we visited. Additionally, we confirmed that Connor's wife lives at the Chesterfield home and is registered to vote from that address. We set up an interview with Connor for Wednesday, but just hours before he canceled. That evening, a little after 7:30, we went to his Chesterfield home, but no answer. Thursday morning, we asked again and he declined. This time at his business.
I'd like to pick up all this.
And finally, on Friday morning, Connor agreed to an interview.
My Chesterfield residence, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about, is my secondary residence.
Connor told us his townhouse has always been used as a rental property and that his house on Germain Road is his primary residence in Richmond. It's where he's registered to vote, and it's the address listed on his driver's license.
That's where you spend most nights?
Yes.
At the Germain house?
I spend nights both places. I don't keep a tally of where I stay. I just don't have time to do that.
So we asked about the many neighbors who spoke to us.
They say that they never see anyone at that home, that they never see any cars in the driveway, and that the house has been vacant.
Yeah. Well, at this time, with the political season coming up right now, I really can't be responsible for what people say.
We knocked on probably about 20 doors, and there wasn't anyone that knew you.
Yeah.
I mean, as a city councilman, isn't that strange?
Well, I don't think so, because the days people going back and forth, people don't really get to know people very, very well.
So what about the campaign contributions?
Your address was listed to Chesterfield. Was that an oversight, or?
Well, No, that was my, well, actually, that is my legislative committee, auto body, you know. And I don't know why that would, I don't even know why that would have been listed there, actually.
When asked how many days a week would be appropriate to hold a primary residence, Connor told us 4 days, but again, couldn't give us the number of his days spent weekly at Germain Road because he doesn't keep track.
No, I couldn't. I really couldn't do that. It would be very hard to do.
Have you ever encountered a situation where...
To be clear on state laws on candidate residency, we visited with legal expert Stephen Peepgrass.
Your domicile is the one where you lay your head most often.
He says the Virginia law is clear. Candidates must have a domicile in the district.
Districts are fairly small, and so people know if a person actually lives there or not. If the candidate doesn't live in the district where they're trying to run for election, they really don't know what the voters in that area need.
But Connor says he does know his constituents and knows what issues are important to them. And he says it's because of that he won re-election by a good margin. He says for some time questions about his residency have come up, so he's glad he got to give us an answer.
I welcome the opportunity to do this, you know. But the fact of the matter is, I think people in my district, they're not really concerned about that as much as they are concerned about what I do for them.
The sounds of laughing children often echo in this front yard, nestled in the heart of the museum district, where the Neild family is raising their 2 children.
Kids are meant to play outside.
But the laughter suddenly stopped on the afternoon of June 14th.
She just wants to forget. She just never wants to remember this.
When Philip Neild says his wife walked outside to see their children and found the unthinkable.
She was so petrified. He'd come in through the front gate and he was leaning over the rails, abusing my son. He had his hand deep down inside my son's shorts.
In that moment, Neild says 50-year-old Michael Davis, a neighbor, shattered his family's sense of security. To spare the children the heartache of a trial, the family settled on a plea agreement. In October, Davis pled guilty to aggravated sexual battery of a 3-year-old child and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. But the judge suspended all but 3 months, citing the lack of a criminal history. Davis was also told to have 0 contact with the Neild family and forced to register as a sex offender.
I mean, there's no ways we would have agreed him to live in that house.
But just weeks after his conviction, Michael Davis was not only out of jail, he was living back in his upstairs apartment in the 3000 block of Grove Avenue, just 1 block from his victim and less than 60 feet from the school attended by the Neild's 9-year-old daughter.
The only thing that separated him from the school was a road. My daughter walks down that road every day to school.
The Neilds and other parents were beside themselves.
It's just very concerning.
How, they wondered, was a convicted sex offender allowed to live so close? Neighbors and school officials had expressed concerns to police even before Davis attacked the Neild son.
Stares a lot, says inappropriate things.
CBS 6 got involved back in October when the school sent a letter home to parents soon after Davis's release. Raising another red flag, this picture taken by a neighbor
in the street right in front of the school,
showing what appeared to be Davis on the sidewalk directly beside the school.
Have they told you you're okay to live where you are right now?
For now, yeah.
On October 24th, Davis told us that he believed he was within his legal right to remain in his home.
Have you been asked to move?
Not yet.
But you think you should move?
I will eventually, I guess. Yeah.
Within 1 day of our story airing, the Department of Corrections moved Davis out of the neighborhood, but not because he was violating his parole or the terms of the sex offender registry. That's according to Richmond Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney Edward Nickel.
The aggravated sexual battery conviction for the Code of Virginia, it prevents somebody from loitering within 100 feet of a school, but it doesn't say anything about living within 100 feet of a school.
But if the law allows him to live there, why was he forced to move?
I think that it was ultimately his decision, that he realized that it was not going to be a tenable living situation for him to be there because the community didn't want him there.
According to Virginia law, only sex offenders convicted of more serious offenses of rape or sodomy face clear restrictions about where they can and can't live. For others, like Davis, it's a gray area, and prosecutors say their hands are unfortunately tied.
How is living not considered a form of loitering?
If you have a hypothetical situation where somebody's inside their house, sitting in their living room, they're not in violation of that code section. However, if they're sitting on their porch and they're hanging out outside and they're within 100 feet of the school, I would think that that's loitering.
But even with photographic evidence and accusations from neighbors, Nichols says proving Davis had been loitering was difficult.
This is such a murky area and it's very complicated.
CBS 6 legal analyst and defense attorney Todd Stone says more and more courts have started placing constitutional limits on how restrictive sex offender laws can be.
There's a point where the law can be too restrictive and unconstitutional and cruel and unusual punishment. And, you know, our Constitution's been around a lot longer than the laws that we have today.
Philip Neild sees things a little differently.
We were the victims.
He says his family fell prey to a confusing law meant to protect them.
People like this have turned not just our lives, but the whole state, the whole country's lives, upside down.
Letting go of the past and moving on has not been easy for the Neilds.
We're becoming prisoners in our own home.
And while they would rather forget about what's happened to their family, the Neilds wanted to tell their story. They fear their silence could only hurt someone else.
Whose kids are going to go missing before they actually start taking this sex registry serious and before they actually start seriously looking after the people?
The Neild family says they'll continue to speak out and push lawmakers to more clearly define Virginia's sex offender laws. According to the Virginia State Police Sex Offender Registry, Michael Davis is now living in a hotel in downtown Richmond with several other registered sex offenders. Tracy Sears, CBS 6 News.
It's something that you think about all the time.
Though in an unmarked grave, there are some who haven't forgotten.
Two twins were found at St. Paul College and never solved the murder.
This is where they laid them to rest.
And 14 years later, there are those who can't forget.
It was rough. One of the worst things I've seen.
What happened here inside this St. Paul's College dorm in the small town of Lawrenceville is hard to imagine.
They had been born alive and thrown down a trash chute.
And for those who work the case, the crime scene is a macabre memory.
It's one of those cases that a police officer has in his career that haunts him, and it still haunts me to the day.
You lie in bed at night thinking, you know, what could I have done differently?
Police arrive at Holt Dorm on February 16, 1998, after one of the twins is discovered just inside these doors that lead to the bottom of the trash chute. A second infant is found a short time later.
I just couldn't believe that someone had thrown these two children away in this trash.
Up on the top floor, the hall and bathrooms look clean until investigators spray a chemical that reveals blood.
It was blood on the walls, down the staircase, going down the staircase, smears on the walls as if, you know, somebody had leaned against a wall and was walking themselves down the staircase.
We found it in one of the bathroom stalls that the babies had been born in that stall.
What police don't find is the mother.
I figured that we would find them pretty quick at a doctor's office or a hospital somewhere close by.
I fully believed before that day was over with, we were going to have someone in custody. I fully believed that.
In fact, the mother is never found.
I think she was taken away from the scene.
And while police believe she had help in the birth and with cleanup, they find no one willing to come forward with information.
I know there's someone in that dorm at that point and that night and that day heard something and saw something.
The twins are taken to the medical examiner's office in Richmond, where it is determined they were alive when they were born and killed before being dumped down the trash chute. As the days turn into weeks, the investigators realize this case could go unsolved, but they also realize they have another issue. That's what to do with the twins. It's at that moment that a veteran police officer decides he needs to get involved personally, and he makes his case to bring the twins back to Lawrenceville. Newcomb then talks to 3 funeral homes in the area about a service for the twins.
It was just the fact that they were babies and nobody wanted them. They threw them in the trash. And I just felt like someone needed to take care of them.
He wanted closure for these children just as much as anybody else living and breathing in the United States. And I think this was his way of giving them closure.
Exactly 1 month to the day the twins were discovered, a funeral is held for baby boy and baby girl. 3 local funeral homes and the town coming together to say goodbye.
There's no question there was a healing process for the town, although there were very few people in town involved, but it was a healing process for the ones that were involved.
While the crime scene is still fresh in the minds of those involved,
Just think about what it could have been.
there is one other memory that won't be forgotten.
They were perfect little babies.
Yeah, 9 months.
Yeah,
They went to.
they were perfect. I come out here on night shift probably once a month or so, or once every other month, and stop and just ponder to what had happened and what it could have been. They were just beautiful little children.
They want to have justice for those two babies. I think somebody needs to come forward.
I never lose faith that this case will be closed.
In Lawrenceville, Wayne Koval, CBS 6 News.
We now introduce you to Jim O'Farrell, who spent nearly 30 years in the Army as a Ranger. After serving his country, he is now settling down in Churchill and is living a new life with a different band of brothers, going from the streets of Baghdad to sound checks in a recording studio. Jim O'Farrell couldn't be happier his days of touring are behind him.
I started off with listening to Gordon Lightfoot and Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Jim's journey as a professional musician did not include cheap motels, smoky clubs, and small towns.
For my earliest memories, I have a guitar in my hand.
His 2+ years on the road included stops in Fallujah, Ramadi, and Baghdad.
And we ran escort operations and gun truck patrols all over the entire country. We were everywhere.
Jim survived 2 harrowing year-long tours in Iraq in 2005 and 2008.
When an IED hits, it just suddenly it blows up.
Each deployment.
And in order to be an effective leader, you can't say, go get them. You have to say, follow me.
Jim led dozens of young men, some just 18, into battle.
The nickname for a platoon sergeant is platoon daddy. And it's an affectionate term that they never say to your face.
Enormous pressure came with his job.
I always appreciated the fact that those were my troops, that they were somebody else's sons. Parents were entrusting their kids to me.
He used his instrument as an escape behind closed doors.
I was a platoon sergeant, so I couldn't let the guys see the platoon sergeant rocking out, you know, just not the image they needed to see.
But that changed.
You'd feel the adrenaline just pour completely out.
He soon found himself offering guitar guidance following dangerous missions.
It was a very good relief. It was a good way to sort of break completely away and disengage mentally and emotionally from what was outside the wire.
I never said goodbye.
Jim's passion for music intensified on the battlefield. His experiences flowed onto paper.
I wrote this song while I was in Iraq on my second deployment.
With 28 years of military service behind him, Jim is embarking on a new mission.
Yeah, I guess I don't look like the Ranger. I look more like the hippie Woodstock guy than the Army Ranger now, and that's cool. I dig it.
Jim is now leading a new group, the Men of the Jim O'Farrell Band, or the J.O.B.
When we do a show, we don't take breaks.
No matter where his music career takes him, the days of his other tour dates will never fade.
I hope it always stays with me. It would be a shame to forget Iraq. I think it was a very important part of me.
I'm not alone.
Jim's song Messenger sat in the top 40 contemporary charts last spring. You can catch this former Army Ranger and his bandmates performing all across Virginia.
Good Saturday morning, everyone. You are looking at the start line for the 2012 UCROPS Monument Avenue 10K. It will kick off in just about 60 seconds from now. 40,000 runners about to take to the streets of the city of Richmond, led by some of the fastest intermediate runners the world has ever seen. Back here at the finish line in Murrow Park, Lane Casadante and Bart Yasso, the CEO of Runner's World magazine, gracious enough to join us again this year. Welcome back.
Hey, good to be
Sorry,
back.
the
Len.
rain is not going to hold off, but for runners, this is good news.
Yeah, these cool temperatures and a little bit of rain is not going to slow these runners down. We got 2 defending champions coming back to defend their title, which is really good. It'll create a fast race, and yeah, this weather actually is going to work. The rain's going to work to the advantage of the runners.
This race has gained in stature partly because the sports backers have increased the purse for the winners. There's an extra $500 for winning the event. We also have our Dash for the Cash contestant, Melissa Phillips, who is starting out near Hamilton Street. She gets about a 2.2-mile head start. You'll be able to see her progress along with the leaders on the bottom of our screen in what we call our dot race. This is the 8th year of the AT&T Dash for the Cash. 5 of the first 7 years, the Dash participant has beat the elite runners to the finish line. They don't like that too much.
Yeah, we'll see what happens today. But there, you can see the runners are off right now. And that means Melissa Phillips has started her Dash for the Cash person. And right now, she's got that big lead. But eventually, she gets to actually feel that some of the fastest runners in the world creeping up on her. And she's got to stay out there. There's Melissa.
Melissa Phillips from Richmond, 26 years old, trying to become the 6th Dash for the Cash winner in the 8-year history of this event. Bart had mentioned the defending champions and the previous champions that are in this field on both the men's and the women's side. There are 3 previous champions. The last 2 men's winners of this event, Elaine Rita from 2010 and Julius Kogo from last year, are both racing against each other. And Bart expects that the 2 of them will probably decide the finish of this race today. The 2-time defending women's champion, Megan Wright, is trying to go for a 3-peat, which has never been done in this event.
Yeah, that's tough to do, but she's obviously fit. She obviously knows how to race well on this course, and she obviously loves this 10K distance, so it's a big advantage to her.
Some of our wheelchair participants are going off as well. The rain has just started here in Murrow Park and over at the finish line, which is just about 6 blocks away. It is not a heavy rain. It's more like a drizzle, trying to keep everything damp right now. But for the runners that have trained in cold temperatures, this is probably a good thing for them. Our first camera on the course is at Stewart Circle, where the elites, it's less than a mile into the event. The elites are coming around right there. Our Sean Robertson is at Stewart Circle. We bring him into this morning's coverage. Good morning, Sean. All right, we have a little bit of trouble with Sean's microphone, but I know he will be there at Stewart Circle showing us the pictures from just inside the race. Now, when they get back there, they have less than a mile to go.
Yeah, that's about a half mile into the race, and that's a key point. This is where they enter Monument Avenue and start that out and back stretch, but as you mentioned, Lane, that is a key point on the way back.
CBS 6 News presents Battleground Virginia.
Good morning and welcome to Battleground Virginia. We're now just about 2 weeks away from Election Day, and the eyes of the political world are still fixed upon 3 states, Florida, Ohio, and the Old Dominion. The candidates have been appearing with almost daily regularity and spending the bulk of their ad money in those 3 states. But here in the Commonwealth, the presidential race is not the only contest that has Democrats and Republicans going toe-to-toe. The race between 2 former governors could decide which party controls the U.S. Senate. Joining me this morning, the Democratic candidate in that contest, former Governor Tim Kaine. Welcome, sir.
Hey, Bill. Great to be back.
Good to have you. Well, this week, the president, by all accounts, reaffirmed himself in the debate with Mitt Romney, and that's important because here in Virginia, he had been slipping in recent weeks. Why has the race tightened up for the president so much in Virginia?
Because Virginia is truly a battleground state. You know, one of the things that was so interesting, even when I ran for lieutenant governor in 2001, everyone said Virginia in presidential politics just rock solid red, and it's not going to be anything different. But how quickly things change. And so now we've moved into the purple zone. I tell my friends we're still a little bit in the reddish tinge of the purple zone. For a Democrat to win statewide in Virginia, you have to actually, you know, kind of build a better mousetrap and do a little bit better. But the race is close because Virginia is a very close state. We've earned our battleground state status, and that's a good thing because it means that Virginians of Democrat, Republican, or Independent, they get to see the candidates. Candidates have to come here and make their case, and that's why these races are close.
Well, and we're going to talk about your race in just a moment, but you've been running a commercial in which you say you work well with presidents regardless of their party affiliation.
Absolutely.
Is that a way to distance yourself from President Obama in case a voter wants to get to the poll and say, well, gee, I like Tim Kaine, but I'm not so sure about President Obama?
No, because the commercial's got a great picture of me and President Obama in it, but it also has a wonderful picture of me with President Bush. The point
One
I'm
of the
making,
few Democrats to actually say, hey, I was with George Bush on this.
I might be the only Democrat or Republican running an ad with positive about President Bush, because the Bush administration was absolutely critical to one of the key projects I worked on as governor, which is building rail to Dulles in Northern Virginia. They were critical on it. You know, the point I'm making is, look, I'm a strong supporter of President Obama, and I very much want him to be reelected. But my job as a senator will be to be a partner with my Senate colleagues, regardless of party, and a partner with the president, regardless of party. For 3 of my 4 years as governor, President Bush was president. And while we disagreed on many things, I gave the State of the Union response one year to President Bush's speech. Whenever I could, we looked for ways to partner. So we partnered on rail to Dulles. We partnered on responding in the aftermath of the shooting at Virginia Tech. When President Bush tried to convince Congress that a presidential line item veto would be a good thing, I was the only Democratic governor that would stand with him and say it is a good thing and this would be good for the nation. I will always define myself as a partner with the president and not an obstructionist to the president.
And yet your policy on energy, for example, seems to diverge with the president. You're running an ad where you're in a helicopter above a Wise County coal plant.
That I worked hard to get permitted.
Supported its construction. Senators Warner and Webb support offshore drilling. We heard this week Governor Romney criticizing the president for his policy, saying he hinders such development. Is there a lot of space between you and the president? Is the president wrong on energy?
Well, I definitely have some different points of view than the president. Being a supporter doesn't mean I agree with him all the time. And I've pointed out in the campaign a number of areas where we disagree. Now, on energy policy, we're producing a lot more natural gas under President Obama than we were under the previous administration. We're exporting petroleum for the first time in 50 years. We're nearer to energy independence than we've been for a very long time. So the president's overall energy policies, heavy use of American native energy, innovating to use more, I support. There are some areas where we disagree. So, for example, I called on the administration from the very first day, start seismic drilling off the coast to determine the size of energy reserves, and then we can make a decision about whether we can profitably and safely find energy off coast. The president did not do that right away. Within the last 6 months, he has authorized the kind of seismic activity I called for. I have signed on to as a supporter of the proposal that Senators Webb and Warner have with respect to offshore drilling, so long as some of the revenues are shared with Virginia. And I basically believe that the right answer on energy is let's innovate. We don't do anything the way we did it yesterday. Let's innovate, whether it's on offshore drilling, whether it's offshore wind. Let's innovate in coal. The Wise plant that I worked hard to make sure got permitted is an innovative state-of-the-art facility. But let's also, and this is where I differ from my opponent, George Allen, let's also recognize the great opportunities in alternative energy, wind and solar. 66,000 Virginians work in green energy jobs, but my opponent continually ridicules them, saying, oh, these are unproven technologies. Far from it. There's a lot of Virginians employed in these new industries. They're exciting, and we need to promote them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your role now, the new job that you'd like to have. We heard from former Senator Allen last week in the debate that he questions whether a former DNC chair, the head of the Democratic National Committee, can actually be a bipartisan figure. As the head of the DNC, you're kind of the lead person, the lead attack dog, some say. How does a guy like that suddenly become a bipartisan, deliberative member of the most deliberative body in the world, supposedly the Senate?
Nothing sudden about it. I've been a bipartisan bridge builder for my entire career. I was mayor here in Richmond, very diverse city. got chosen mayor, nonpartisan job, because people knew that whatever the person's views, we could gather around the table and put the ideas on the table and go ahead and, get Maggie Walker High School open and cut the crime rate and bring businesses back and clean up the James River. Then for 8 years, I was a statewide official, lieutenant governor and governor. For 6 of those years, 2 Republican houses. For 2 years, 1 house of each. When I was governor in the worst recession in 75 years, Virginia was best managed state in America, Governing Magazine. Best state to do business 4 years in a row, Forbes Magazine. Best state to raise a child, Education Week. I was doing it in a recession, and I was doing it with Republican legislators. I know how to work together. My point about this is also Georgia's got a track record. When he was governor, he said, I enjoy knocking Democrats' soft teeth down their whiny throats.
Which you repeated several times last week.
Yeah, I repeated it. You've never heard Tim Kaine say anything like that about the other side. I got a Republican governor as a father-in-law. I do not bash people by name. I just don't think that's the way to do politics. And I will go into the Senate with the track record of working together, while my opponent, when he was in the Senate, he was ridiculing John Warner, our senior senator, because John Warner was too willing to compromise with Democrats. We need people who know how to build bridges.
Well, and speaking of compromise and working in these so-called gangs of 6 or 14, the super committee, Simpson-Bowles, Senator Warner has taken pains to express support for that kind of venture. Who among the current Republican senators could you envision actually working with?
Let me give you a couple examples. I'm just going to move next door to Tennessee. Lamar Alexander and Bob Corker. Lamar Alexander is a senior senator who's done very, very good work, proud Republican, but he has repeatedly, especially in the last year, said that what we need to do in the Senate is build bridges. Bob Corker. Bob and I have a little bit of a similar track record. He was the mayor of Chattanooga before he became senator. I have had that experience of working as a mayor. And when you're a mayor, and especially in a city like Richmond where it's nonpartisan, people might know your party, but that's not what they care about. They care about, can you cut crime, can you build schools, can you grow the economy, can you clean up the James River, can you do things that make the quality of life powerful? And we were able to do that. So I think Bob Corker would be a great example. I can think of others, obviously Susan Collins in Maine, Marco Rubio, because of my fluency in Spanish and the fact that I lived in Central America for a year. We're both passionate about America's issues. I could see working with a Marco Rubio on immigration issues. So there are many Republicans I feel like I could work with very well.
Let's shift now to abortion. Can a voter who wants Roe v. Wade overturned vote for you?
No one is pro-abortion, and I'm not either. I think we ought to do everything we can to reduce abortions. But I think the right way to do that, Bill, is to not criminalize women's health care choices. I think that's the wrong strategy, because women can make their own moral decisions and their own health care decisions. So I think if you want to reduce abortions, look, let's join together. Let's expand health care access to women. Let's have better adoption policies. Let's expand access to contraception. I think that's very important. History has shown that if you do those things, you dramatically drive down abortions and unwanted pregnancies. That's the way I think we should do it. Unlike my opponent, I don't think we should criminalize or otherwise stigmatize women for making constitutional choices.
Well, Vice President Biden, though, last week said during the debate that no religious institution would have to refer, pay for, or be a vehicle for contraception for insurance coverage, but the bishops say that it would force employers to provide sterilization and contraception drugs. You're a Catholic. Does that concern you?
I respectfully disagree with the bishops on this. Now, I agreed with the bishops when the Obama administration announced that under the Affordable Care Act, the mandated insurance coverage would include contraception for preventive care. Contraception is used by an awful lot of women as a pharmaceutical way to avoid cancer or for cancer treatments. I actually was glad about the contraceptive mandate. I thought it was great. But the Obama administration did not give religious employers a broad enough exemption, and I spoke out publicly and said, I think you need to fix this to protect the religious liberty of these institutions. I talked to the White House and suggested some fixes that I thought would protect religious liberty, and they adopted one of them, not just because I suggested, many were suggesting. The White House's fix, to my way of thinking, completely solved the religious liberty issue. And the only remaining issue is, are you pro or against contraception? The bishops aren't happy about it, but I actually believe they're not happy about it because they're against contraception, which they make very plain. But under the current rule, religious institutions don't have to provide contraception. If they provide insurance coverage, the insurer has an obligation to reach out privately to the covered woman and make that offer. It's not the religious institution that has to do it. And I think that's a very, very fair accommodation of real religious liberty concerns. And I said at the end of that, with that accommodation, the only reason to oppose this is if you're against contraception. I don't think restricting contraception access is a good public policy.
All right, we're going to have to take a quick break here, but coming up after the break, what does sequestration mean to you and the Commonwealth? We'll talk sequestration and how those looming defense cuts could devastate Virginia. Stay with us.
You're watching CBS 6 News, Battleground Virginia.
Welcome back and continue our discussion now with former governor and current U.S. Senate candidate Tim Kaine. Let's talk a little bit about defense. You said during the debate that former Senator Allen wants to add $2 trillion to defense. What is the proper level of spending?
I don't remember that during the debate. What I remember saying is we have to find an answer to avoid these sequestration cuts that are coming at the end of the year. There's going to be $1 trillion of cuts over 10 years, half defense, half non-defense. And I've put a really specific plan on the table about a way Congress, in a compromised way, can avoid these cuts. George Allen has said, well, we just need to repeal the Affordable Care Act. The problem with that is it wouldn't help us narrow the gap. All the estimates say that repeal would dramatically widen the deficit. So how do we avoid defense cuts that could hurt Virginia? I believe we should let the Bush tax cuts expire for the first dollar of income over $500,000. Everybody keeps the tax cut up to that point, but then you let that tax cut expire. My opponent disagrees. He says we have to make the tax cuts permanent for the wealthiest. If we do what I say, it creates $500 billion in revenue, which we can use to dramatically shrink the need for cuts.
Because January 1 Defense is looking at a $50 billion cut and $50 billion from domestic at the same time. And it was President Obama talking about Mitt Romney that wanted to add the $2 trillion.
Right.
I apologize.
Yeah. And on January 1, all the Bush tax cuts expire, so let's find a compromise. You know, the President and Democrats say let the tax cuts expire over $250. The Republicans and George Allen say make them all permanent. We need a compromise. So let them expire over $500,000. That will produce $500 billion in revenue and reduce the need for cuts. Fix Medicare. Right now, under the Medicare program, when we buy prescription drugs from pharmaceutical companies, we are prohibited by law from negotiating for prices. If you just fix that one thing, that saves another $250 billion nearly. And then let's take tax subsidies away from the big 5 oil companies that made $137 billion in profit last year. Do those things, and instead of $1 trillion of defense cuts, what we end up with is over 10 years, can we find $230 billion of savings? Look, I had to cut $5 billion out of an $80 billion budget when I was governor of Virginia. We can find $230 billion of savings over 10 years.
Without compromising defense.
Out of a $3.6 trillion budget, we definitely can do it. I've repeatedly said to my opponent, you say you don't want defense cuts, so put a plan on the table. But the only thing he said is, well, we should have the 35th vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And all the math shows if you were successful, which you're not going to be, if you were successful, that would explode the deficit, not reduce it.
Well, so was sequestration an appropriate way to deal with the looming budget issues, to say simply, we can't resolve it right now, we'll kind of kick it down the road after the election and have these automatic sort of indiscriminate cuts coming?
Kicking things down the road is never a good idea, but remember the choice. As Governor McDonnell said, he was on Meet the Press last weekend, he said the choice was between do we do a deal that includes sequestration or, which was a compromise, not a great compromise, or do we allow America to default on its credit and trigger an international financial meltdown? George Allen was in the let's have a meltdown position. Bob McDonnell, Eric Cantor, President Obama, John Boehner, Tim Kaine, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, everyone else agreed we got to find a compromise. And I think the sequester is a great example of, do you want somebody in the Senate who will work to find compromise, or do you want somebody in the Senate who will take fiscally extreme positions and then not offer compromises to actually find solutions?
Let's talk briefly about the Affordable Care Act. Why do so many Virginians dislike it?
Well, my suggestion, what I've seen in the polling is it's about even. About half the people would want to do away with it, but other people...
When they talk perhaps about specific things, like maybe up to 26 years old under their parents' insurance, but as a whole, the message seems to be the Affordable Care Act not itself popular, even if items are.
Yeah, and what I'll say, Bill, I'm not a message whiz. I'm a policy guy. I'm about results. And you're right. If you pull the individual items, And this is where George Allen and I differ. He wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Okay, so you want to throw young people off their families' insurance policies age 21 to 26? You want to take free preventive care under Medicare and reduce price prescription drugs away from seniors? Take tax credits away from small businesses? You want to let insurance companies beat people up if they have a pre-existing condition or charge women different premiums? I don't want to go back to those days. So that's why what I say we ought to do is we've got these improvements in place that are improvements that Virginians, if you go specifically, that they want to keep in place. Now let's find improvements going forward. George says he wants his first vote in the Senate to be to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That's already been tried 34 times, and we just had a 2-year partisan litigation that ended up in the Supreme Court. I don't want to spend my time in the rearview mirror, and I don't think Virginians do either. Let's look in the windshield, let's move forward, let's make the fixes that we need to make.
The cost seems to be an issue, though. Do you believe the CBO estimates of its cost savings? Is it deficit neutral, as President Obama had demanded during the legislative process?
Compared to the status quo, compared to what came before, absolutely. Look, what came before was a real train wreck. My opponent was in the Senate for 6 years. When he was in the Senate, Americans' health care premiums went up by 80%, and 8 million more Americans were uninsured when he left than when he started. We were on a path to a real big problem for tens of millions of Americans without insurance, and then the Americans with insurance subject to getting pushed around by insurance companies on pre-existing conditions, charged different premiums if they were women. So the Affordable Care Act was a very strong step, but we still need to do more on cost control. But repealing it to throw kids off their family policies or tell seniors they can't have free preventive care or let women be charged different premiums, that would be a big mistake.
All right. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. Former Governor Tim Kaine, we thank you so much for your time. We will hear from your opponent, George Allen, next week.
Great. Thanks, Bill.
New at 11, his dog killed by a downed power line after the storm. Why this local man tells us it never should have happened.
We didn't hear any breaking. All I know is that we were hit.
Some miraculous survival stories emerging from this weekend's storms. A woman talks to CBS 6 about what she believes saved her and her aunt from certain death.
And an unusual discovery on the roof of a building on West Broad Street. What killed a man whose body was found, and how did it get there? I'm Stephanie Rochon.
And I'm Bill Fitzgerald. More than 168,000 Dominion Virginia power customers remain in the dark tonight, victims of some of the most powerful non-hurricane related storms to ever hit the Old Dominion.
That includes less than 17,000 in central Virginia as crews work to restore power. Is there a chance we could see more storms tomorrow? Here's Zach with our top story.
I think we will see more storms across the area. We did have a few out there today, and a couple of these did go severe across parts of southwest Virginia and south central Virginia. You see those dropping now down in North Carolina, pretty much gone, but did produce some pretty large hail out in parts of Appomattox County and also moved through Lunenburg and Mecklenburg counties. Now things are quiet and will remain quiet for the rest of tonight. But outside right now, it is warm and it is humid. This will be part of the ingredients for storms tomorrow. Temperatures will only fall into the low and mid 70s overnight tonight. And with the south wind tomorrow drawing up more moisture into the region, that will set the stage for more storms in the afternoon. And the strongest of those will produce wind gusts over 60 miles per hour and some large hail. So we're in a slight risk for tomorrow, all of central and eastern Virginia. We'll talk more about your forecast in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Zach. In the aftermath of any severe storm, the warnings are constant. Report all downed power lines and stay away from them. But one local man says his dog was electrocuted by wires in his backyard. A death he says never should have happened. Lorenzo Hall is live now with the story. So,
you know, Bill, while those downed power lines have caused temporary detours and power outages for folks here in central Virginia, one Henrico man says those downed power lines caused a permanent loss. His dog.
I let my dog down.
For that reason, this Henrico man says he'll never forget these summer storms. Kenneth Newland's dog of 12 years was electrocuted and killed by a downed power line following the initial round of severe storms last Monday.
It wasn't a typical dog bark. It was like a stress bark. I whipped my head around and I saw her in the air.
The burn marks are still present. Newland says he was assessing the damage from the storm with a neighbor when his dog Emily ran to the back of the yard where an energized power line was laying. Newland could only watch because he too would have been electrocuted.
I watched sparks come off her paws and Then I had to sit there and smell her smolder for 40 minutes.
Newland tells us he called Dominion and warned them about the wire dangling across his yard, but says no one removed it before restoring power. In a statement, Dominion says in part, this was a very unfortunate circumstance and reinforces the importance of reporting downed power lines to the company, not just outages. Our thoughts and heartfelt prayers are with the family for the loss of their dog. A few doors down from Newland, this man claims Dominion has been negligent with its power restoration efforts. He too had a down line that was energized and started a fire near his dog's pen.
You know, I've got 2 kids. They're worried about the dogs. They could have come out and touched the fence and been dead just as quick as anybody.
As for Newland, he's thankful his son and wife didn't venture into the charged area first.
What do you say?
Now, Newland says he cremated his dog Emily shortly after that incident. Newland says he is still waiting to hear from Dominion about why that line was energized. But for now, we're live in Richmond tonight. I'm Lorenzo Hall for CBS 6 News. Steph, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Lorenzo. New at 11, a woman talks to CBS 6 News about a ride she'll never forget. Stuck behind the wheel with her aunt in Hanover Saturday night as a tornado was cutting a swath across the county. As John Burkett tells us, she believes she's truly lucky to still be here. John.
Stephanie, Amy Harvey thought it was just another summer storm. She was heading into Mechanicsville to get a few things for her 4-year-old twins. She says thankfully she had dropped them off and they didn't have to experience the seconds of uncertainty sealed with a tree.
2 miles, 2 minutes down the road, it all changed.
A trip into town.
I don't know how I was not severely injured.
Turns into a tornadic tale of luck and survival for Amy Harvey and her aunt Linda Tucker.
We saw nothing coming. We didn't hear any braking. All I know is that we were hit.
Amy Harvey and her aunt were heading northbound on Beatty's Mill Road when a family member called and said, you got to turn back, this storm looks really bad. So up here in this driveway, they make a U-turn in their Ford 250 pickup truck, head back south. When they get to this spot, a tree snaps. Looking at it right up there, about 15 feet up in the air, snapped like a toothpick. It falls down. The base of this tree is about 3 feet wide. This here, where it fell on top of the truck, is about 1.5 feet.
I don't know how we walked away.
Just a few cuts and scratches, in fact. That's all Amy has to show for her brush with death. Of course, that's not counting the huge dents and dings in her truck, one the insurance company she believes will most likely have to total after they take a look at Boeing cab doors and extensive damage under the hood. But the truck, Amy says, is why she's alive.
American made, and I think that the head cage saved us. I really do. The roof and the windshield were laying on the steering wheel.
While shooting Amy's story this afternoon, VDOT trucks were moving debris by the truckful. There's a stretch of 360 near West Store where all you see is trees on tops of cars and toppled trees in people's front and backyards. John Burkett, CBS 6 News.
Thank you, John. While it's still bad for a lot of people in Central Virginia, folks are really hurting in Northern Virginia, D.C., and Southern Maryland. Many are cleaning up massive amounts of damage while wondering why it's taking so long to get the power turned back on. Danielle Nottingham reports from Silver Spring, Maryland, an area devastated by Friday night's storm.
The power came back too soon to this neighborhood in Silver Spring, Maryland. Sparks from the still damaged line caused a fire and another delay for some in the 2 million homes and businesses still waiting for the lights to come back on. Vanessa Himmons blames her power company, Pepco.
Having this downed wire is so dangerous, and we've called it in numerous times, and not only have they not removed it, but then they're sending power through it and starting fires.
The damage is being blamed on a straight-line windstorm called a Derecho, which is Spanish for straight ahead. With gusts up to 80 miles an hour, the Derecho raged from Indiana 600 miles to the nation's capital, lighting up the night sky while knocking out the lights to 3 million at its worst.
Trees come down and destroy the infrastructure. That's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, you have to look at this as a catastrophic event.
Falling trees caused most of the damage and deaths blamed on the storm, but now officials are worried the death toll may climb thanks to a heat wave and residents using generators. Coco Simon says she's not sure how much more she can take.
We may have to go try a hotel somewhere, but we don't really have the money to do that.
Power crews were back outside the Himmons' home, repairing the line that caught fire. Silver Spring's forecast high for Tuesday for those with or without electricity is 95 degrees. Danielle Nottingham, CBS News, Silver Spring, Maryland.
The governor addressed the state Saturday morning, but when Richmond's mayor spoke for the first time more than 24 hours later, Sunday evening, some residents were asking whether city leaders had been doing enough to help those without power. As Sandra Jones found out, those are questions Richmonders want answered.
It's been hot. It's been hell.
Walter McCaster will tell you he's been sweating it out in his house.
We've sat in this house in our houses for 3 days at 100-degree temperature with no word, getting hotter, getting frustrated, being angry.
McCaster is just one of many in Richmond's Oak Grove neighborhood doing whatever they can to beat the heat.
Can't stay in the house, it's too hot.
In this community, you'll see trees on cars and residents waiting patiently for Dominion Virginia Power to do its job. But residents tell us what they have not seen is Mayor Dwight Jones or his staff, now several days after the storm.
The mayor is my neighbor. He should come down here and sweat too. And if he's not, he should come down here and sweat anyway. It's his job.
Drive around Richmond and you'll find isolated areas where people are still without power. So seeing crews like the one behind me is a welcome relief, and so are city leaders doing their part.
We need to be in our district. That's more important than anything else. We are the council person for our districts.
We caught up with City Council Member Reva Trammell, handing out bags of ice to residents in the 8th District.
You have seen so many people come in here getting ice where they have run out and got to go get more.
How does that make you feel to be helping people?
Good. And for many who live in this district and others we spoke with around the city, getting some kind of response from city leaders after a storm could be the best relief of all.
Even if you drove up and down the street with a bullhorn and said, "We haven't forgotten you. We know you're in pain. We know you don't have creature comforts. We know you don't have communications with the outside, but we haven't forgotten you." Makes a difference.
In South Richmond, Sandra Jones, CBS 6 News.
And we contacted the mayor about the city's response and why he didn't hold a news conference until Sunday night, nearly 48 hours after the storms hit, and we're still waiting for a response.
Is the city to blame for not cutting down some of the trees that fell during last week's storms? How does it go about selecting which trees need to come down, and how easy is it for homeowners to tell that an old oak or maple may be diseased? As Mark Holmberg found out, looks can be deceiving. His fascinating report is coming up in just a few minutes. You can find complete coverage of the storm and its aftermath on WTVR.com. You'll see video reports and pictures, and you could submit your own photos. We'll also link you to updated Dominion Virginia Power sites.
What killed the man whose body was found on top of a building on West Broad Street? CBS 6 arrived on the scene this afternoon as crews were removing the body. The building's in the 3000 block of West Broad and appears to be vacant. Investigators say it also appears the body had been there for a while. They have sent it to the medical examiner's office for identification and to determine the cause of death. Police say they do not suspect foul play.
New at 11, we've learned the singer for the Richmond-based rock band Lamb of God will spend at least 10 more days in jail in the Czech Republic in connection with a fan's death. According to reports out of Prague, Randy Blythe has posted the $200,000 bail set by the judge, but Blythe must spend the next 10 days behind bars. If and when he is released, he might not be able to leave the country. Spin magazine is reporting the judge says there may well be certain conditions placed on Blythe's release, such as staying in the Czech Republic or the availability of a specific address. And if those conditions are violated, it could lead to an international arrest warrant. Blythe is accused of injuring a fan during a concert at a club in Prague in 2010. The man later died. Friends here in Richmond say they're still stunned by the entire series of events.
Randy, you know, he's a great guy. I mean, I've known him for about 20 years. And, you know, I mean, when he was younger, he was a little bit aggressive. That's a long time ago. He is, you know, he's a very, very peaceful, kind, loving person, you know, and there's just no way he would do anything, hurt anybody intentionally.
Blythe's Lamb of God bandmates have reportedly already returned home to the U.S. Guitarist Mark Morton is encouraging fans to wear Lamb of God shirts to show their support for Blythe on the 4th of July.
New at 11, a bar that has helped bring business back to part of West Broad Street has shut down, at least temporarily. The Republic posted on Facebook earlier today that, quote, due to unfortunate circumstances, will be closed for the day. We sent a crew over to the bar at the corner of Broad and North Allison Street and found a warning posted outside from the Virginia Department of Taxation. It says the tax commissioner has ordered the business closed due to non-payment of state taxes. We're working to learn more about that situation, and we'll bring you an update as soon as we have more information.
Bad news for people in a West End neighborhood who were hoping Walmart would consider building a new store in a different location. The retail giant wants to put a store near Reynolds Crossing off Forest Avenue, but some speculated Walmart would consider instead moving to Glenside Drive since the spot there is being vacated by Kmart. But when contacted by CBS 6 News, a spokesman for the company said they did take a look at the Glenside Drive Kmart location, but concluded it did not offer what they were looking for to best serve customers in the area. Walmart hopes to receive county approval later this month to build at the Reynolds Crossing site. The Henrico Planning Commission is scheduled to vote July 25th.
Police are investigating racial slurs discovered on a sign outside a church in Blackstone. That's located just off Route 460 south of Dinwiddie. A member of the Spring Hill Baptist Church arrived at church Sunday to find this racist words spray painted on both sides of the church's marquee on Route 606. It happened on the church's 168th anniversary. According to members of the congregation, Pastor Travis Warren asked that the sign be left up for several hours. He put a sign next to it that reads, quote, God forgives. As we mentioned earlier, and as you've likely seen for yourself, fallen trees have done major damage in Richmond and other parts of Virginia.
Does the city need to do a better job of removing old, rotten trees before Mother Nature knocks them down? And how can you tell when a tree needs to go? Tonight, Mark Holmberg got with an expert to answer all things arboreal.
So this big, beautiful tree has been here for probably 80 years. Could you predict something like this could happen?
The three things that determine risk in trees is the tree itself, the environmental situation that the tree stands in, and the presence of a target.
Target being a house, car,
playground, school, any kind of man-made structure or foot traffic likelihood.
Trees are like people. Each one is different. And how and where it grows up can determine the likelihood of it falling or weathering the storm.
Certain species do show an increased likelihood for breakage in storms. They are weak-wooded by nature. Some species seem to hold up very well in storms. Research has shown that a codominant trunk that we see in this situation can have an increased likelihood of failure in a storm situation.
Just parking or driving beneath its drip line, usually the span of its roots, can compromise it. So can banging into it with your car or even just a clothesline.
We don't know what might have happened here in the recent past, if there's any kind of construction going on, if there's any trenching that's been going on.
Janine says there are some common misconceptions, like wet soil contributes to tree falls.
It's very rarely the case.
Also, she said, just because a tree is partially hollow or has some areas of decay doesn't necessarily mean it's a menace.
So sometimes there's no rhyme or reason. Here's this giant tulip poplar. Obviously survived a massive lightning strike. We've got a decay zone here, compromised roots, and it survived the storm when trees around it got snapped off.
You can guess, and many times you can be reasonably accurate about it, but failure potential is not an exact science. You can take any 3 or 4 well-educated and credentialed arborists and you'll get 3 or 4 different opinions, all of which are defensible.
And often it's how and where we plant trees that contribute to their peril.
Trees grow in colonies. In nature, they grow in a forest situation. And when humans come along, they remove trees and they build things, and they leave a few specimens standing, or they just add a tree in the middle of a lawn situation, and that's not a natural situation for a tree.
But even the healthiest specimen can snap or be ripped from the ground if a big wind hits it just right.
Same as a non-living structure like a utility pole.
Trees add tremendous value to a property and to a municipality, well beyond their beauty. They help cool in the summer and cushion winter winds. They clean our dirty air, sheltering a host of animals most of us enjoy. You can find a qualified analyst to check your trees at the International Society of Arboriculture website. Remember, like humans, all trees eventually fall to the winds of life.
So a big, beautiful tree like this can be a good friend, save you thousands of dollars. Don't go hacking them down without checking it out first. In Bird Park, Mark Holmberg, CBS 6 News.
CBS 6 Skytracker, sponsored by Baugh Auto Body.
And it has been a tough life for the trees the last week or so with the heat and then with the severe weather, and looks like we could have a little bit of severe weather tomorrow as well. Let's get a check on the time lapse from earlier today. Looking off the south and west at the tops of some big storms, thunderheads as they're commonly known, and that's where the activity was for today, is a very small little cluster of thunderstorms, but if you're used to looking up in the sky and seeing those kinds of things, you probably noticed those off to the south and west. Let's get a check on radar. I'll show you those storms as they continue to move down in North Carolina. They're gone now, really just a few sprinkles down that way along I-95, but pretty decent storms. Appomattox County down into parts of Lunenburg County and then down into Mecklenburg County as well. Near Victoria got a pretty good storm from all of this, and around Farmville as well out in Prince Edward County. We'll be quiet for the rest of tonight, but we will see a chance for some storms tomorrow, not necessarily tied to what we're seeing back to our west, but the atmosphere will become a little bit more primed with more moisture moving in on the backs of some south winds as we get into tomorrow, and will really heat up. We'll be hotter tomorrow than we were for today, and that'll make it more or less a powder keg here across central Virginia, and at some point I think that we'll see enough heat and moisture around to fire off those storms in the afternoon and evening hours. Let's get a check now on our temperatures from today. 74 this morning and 94 this afternoon, so it wasn't cool by any stretch, but I think tomorrow we'll probably make it up to around 97 degrees. And with every situation with moisture around in the spring, summer, or fall, there is a certain temperature that you have to get to really kind of blow the lid off these storms, and I think we'll reach that temperature tomorrow. 80 outside is our current temperature, so a very warm night, pretty muggy as well. Dew point of 68 makes it feel like it's 83 degrees. It's 74 in Farmville, also 74 degrees back in the Tappahannock area, 80 down in Petersburg, 73 in South Hill and Emporia. So for tonight, the quiet weather across the area. You'll wake up to mostly clear skies tomorrow, and then in the afternoon we'll see showers and thunderstorms developing. Some of those could be severe. As we head into tomorrow night, everything will quiet down, and then on Wednesday, Independence Day, start off with a few clouds around, and then we'll have a chance for some storms again as we head into the afternoon hours. So we're going to keep this pattern in place for the most part, with a chance of storms just about each and every afternoon. And with the heat and the moisture around, we're going to see the threat for some strong damaging winds, 60 mile per hour plus, and some large hail as well. Probably quarter or larger. The storms today had golf ball size hail. This slight risk goes for all of central and eastern Virginia tomorrow. Your forecast lows for tonight will drop into the upper 60s. Most of us, though, will stay in the low 70s. As we head into tomorrow afternoon, we'll see highs up into the mid and upper 90s. 97 in Richmond and Fredericksburg, 99 down in Petersburg, 98 degrees over toward the Charlottesville area. Getting a check on your forecast for tomorrow. I think for the first half of tomorrow, we'll just see a quick warm up with a good bit of sunshine. And once we get into the afternoon hours and hit peak heating, we'll see those pop up storms. Very hard to detect where they're actually going to pop up. Just stay weather aware across the area, and we'll keep you ahead of whatever happens to go up. 30% chance on Independence Day, again on Thursday, and then as we head toward the end of the weekend, the pattern changes a little bit, and that'll bring us a little bit better scenario to see some storms around Sunday into Monday.
Thank you, Zach. Coming up after the break, see what a hot day in the streets and in the woods is like for the men and women responsible for restoring your power.
What sent a fighter jet crashing into an apartment complex? The Navy finally has an answer. We're learning more about what caused a fighter jet to crash into an apartment complex in Virginia Beach in April. The Navy now says a catastrophic mechanical failure caused the jet to crash into the Mayfield Mews. Shortly after takeoff, I should say. Investigators say it appears the right tire blew out during takeoff, and the pilot noticed the vibrations 2 seconds later. It then appears tire debris flew into the right engine, causing it to stall. The left engine, which should have kept the jet flying, then failed to light properly, and that's what caused the crew to lose control.
This was indeed a complex, compound, multi-system emergency. The aircrew followed their procedures, but given the cascading series of problems and loss of thrust in altitude, continued controlled flight was not possible.
The Navy says the pilot and co-pilot did all they could to prevent the crash. During today's news conference, it also commended the fire crews on the ground for their work keeping everyone safe following the crash.
We rode around with Dominion Power crews today as they continue to work on restorations, and they told us how they're tackling the massive amount of outages. They say they prioritize repairs by the number of customers affected in each circuit. They're now doing what they call neighborhooding, focusing on areas where only a couple of hundred customers have lost power.
The damage is pretty significant, and it takes a fair amount of resources. It's a time-consuming, methodical thing that you have to go through when you have this kind of damage.
And Dominion crews also tell us the triple-digit temperatures and 16-hour workdays make their job even more difficult, but they say that all repairs should be finished by Saturday night.
Coming up in sports, a former VCU basketball star is back in town to talk about where he'll be playing this summer.
And Lane will tell us how he hopes it'll land him in the NBA.
Good evening, everyone. The VCU Rams opened for A10 business officially today, hosting fans and alumni at a get-together over at Home Team Grill. Bradford Burgess stopped in after today's workout with the news that he will be playing for Orlando in the NBA Summer League, along with former Spiders Kevin Anderson and Justin Harper and former Norfolk State standout Kyle O'Quinn. Burgess wasn't drafted last week, but he sees this as the next best opportunity to show what he can do at the next level.
I had pretty good workouts and, just talked about draft spots and what will happen possibly. But, just say continue to work, continue to do my job, and I will land somewhere. But, I haven't found a place yet. So, hopefully I'm in the right direction.
Former Petersburg standout guard Frank Mason is pulling out of his verbal commitment at Towson. Mason will enroll at Massanutten Military Academy this fall in an effort to bump up his test scores and will reclassify to the class of 2013, meaning his recruitment will again be open. Wave head coach Rick Height expects Louisville and Tennessee to show some interest, and perhaps VCU might jump back in there as well. Work continues on the left field wall at the Diamond, which was knocked down during last Monday's storm that blew through downtown. It will be ready to go when the team returns to start their next homestand Wednesday night. And that's sort of a blessing in disguise. While temporary fencing could have been put up in time for a game the next day, the fact that the team has been gone for a week has helped the Diamond get back in shape without impacting the team's schedule. Some of the players, though, did send some suggestions from the road about how to best rebuild the wall.
The problem I had, though, was as soon as the wall fell down, the Tommy Josephs and Gary Browns of the world, Johnny Monells were all coming up asking me to move the fence in. I got a text message from Juan Perez at like 2 o'clock in the morning the next night saying move it in 15 feet. But sorry, fellas, ain't going to happen. It's still at the same place it was.
Squirrels get a win on the road at Akron tonight. They had to go to 11 innings to win 9-5. They blew a 5-0 lead. Nick Lyles with a 2-run single and a 4-run 11th. The July 4th game, by the way, has been sold out. NASCAR has penalized Austin Dillon 6 points in the Nationwide Series because his car failed post-race inspection after his win at Kentucky Friday night. He gets to keep the win, but not the points lead. The penalty hands that back to Emporia's Elliott Sadler, who now leads Dillon by 4. And just a month after winning the French Open, completing her career Grand Slam and ascending to #1 in the world, Maria Sharapova beaten today at Wimbledon in straight sets by 15th-seeded Sabine Lisicki. This is the 5th time in the last 6 years that the women's top seed has failed to reach the final at Wimbledon. Serena Williams advanced today, and on the men's side, Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer both advanced as well. So there are some big names still left.
I'm still watching. Thank you, Lane.
Yep. And we're still watching to see if we're going to get any more severe weather this week.
Yeah, we'll have a chance tomorrow, I think. It's pretty quiet, all things considered, today. A few storms to our south and west, but tomorrow a little bit better chance out there, and it's going to be the same kind of thing. The wind and the hail are going to be the main threats. So certainly not a broad scale thing like what we had on Friday, but a few severe storms around tomorrow. It looks like on Independence Day as well.
Thank you, Zach, and thanks for watching.
Dave Letterman's up next. Have a great night.